My wife and I have been in ministry for over 35 years. And I graduated with a degree in music, church music, and voice. And the Lord had me go on the road and travel and sing back in the days when it wasn't called contemporary Christian music, it was called Jesus music back then. And then as I traveled to different places, I would find myself leading the congregation or the church or the audience into worship. And I never will forget that after I'd been traveling for several years after graduating, you start getting invited back to churches. That's a good thing, because if you ministered well, they're pleased to have you back. And I remember the first time this experience happened to me, I was in Fairbury, Nebraska, and you'll have to look that one up on the map, Fairbury, Nebraska, and there's a brother up there by the name of Paul Aden. He had asked us to come up there, and several of the churches had asked us to minister, and it was in the Church of God at Fairbury, Nebraska, and I had returned for the second time or so, and it was in July, and I was hot and sweaty. I was setting up my PA system. In those days, everything had to be just so. And I wouldn't sing unless I had a PA system, even if it was for 12 people, I've grown a bit since then. But anyway, so as I was setting up my equipment, the pastor's wife came in and she said, "Hi, Brother Stone, it's really good to have you here. Do you remember when you were here last year?" I said, "Yes, I do." She said, "Do you remember that in the middle of your concert, you led us into worship?" I said, "Well, yes, I remember that." And she said, "I am in charge of the worship here at our church, and I don't have a clue how to lead worship. I don't know the first thing about worship. Can you tell me how to lead worship?" I didn't know what to say. I had never thought of it. Now, you've got to understand, this is back in 1980 that we're talking about, okay? 79 or 80. And I didn't know what to say, and I was sweat dripping off my nose, and I wanted to say something that would help her, but what I said actually was the wrong thing to say. I said, "Well, ma'am, all I do when I lead worship is follow the leading of the Holy Spirit. Surely you can do that." Then I realized how that came out, and I realized, no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't know what to tell you. I don't know how to teach you about worship. But you have to understand, back in those days, I was going to be a Christian star, and I was going to have a record label. I mean, I'd already had several record labels talking to me, and they were just in discussion. I shouldn't name them, but and so that was what my eyes were on. But in the middle of my concerts, God would break out and cause me to just want to worship Him, and I would bring the congregation with Him. Everywhere I went that summer, I had the same questions asked of me. I was asked, "Do you remember when you were here last?" "Yes, I do." "Do you remember how you led us into worship?" "Yes, I do." "Are you going to lead us into worship tonight? Can you teach us more than just that we know?" And I would always answer, "Well, no, but I'm not really interested in teaching you. I'm interested in making it big in the Christian music world." But I wouldn't wouldn't say that. I would just be thinking that. But God ordained a pastor in Salina, Kansas. Because here it was October now, and since July through October, every place I had gone to minister had asked me the same questions. I began to expect it, and I began to feel cocky in that. And so I'm setting up for this church in Salina, Kansas, and the pastor, who had been in Vietnam and had come back, and the Lord had put him into the ministry. Welcome, guys. This pastor in Salina, I was setting up my PA system. He came in and says, "Oh, it's good to have you here, Brother Shamblin, and I'm so glad that you came back." And I said, "Well, I'm thankful that you had me back, because this was my livelihood, and if people didn't want me back, I wouldn't have the offerings." And he said, "Do you remember last year when you were here with us?" I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Do you remember in the middle of your concert, you just stopped your songs that you had written, and you began to lead us into worship?" I said, "Yes, I remember that, because I anticipated that question." He said, "Are you going to lead us into worship again tonight?" I said, "Well, I imagine so." And he looked at me and he said, "I'd rather you wouldn't." I just about fell over. I said, "Did I do something to offend you? Did I do something wrong?" And he said, "No, you don't understand. Last year, you led us into the presence of God like we had never experienced before in our lives, in the life of our church. Then you packed up your PA and you went on down the road. And we have been trying to attain that level of the presence of God ever since you were here. And we have only gotten frustrated because we didn't know how to get into the presence of God. So if you're going to bring us into the presence of God like you did last year, and then just leave us without telling us how we can do that when you're gone, then no thanks." I was hit so hard between the eyes that I cannot, for the life of me, I cannot remember what I did that night. But all I remember is after I drove home, and I got home the next day, my wife was working at the Children's Mercy Hospital up in Kansas City. We were living in Kansas City. And after she'd gotten off to work, I just remember sobbing all day long. And I was so weak, I just lay across my bed and said, "God, why is it that these churches want help with their worship from me? I don't know anything about worship." And I heard God's voice. He said, "I do." I said, "Well, that's great, but I don't." He says, "Well, I'll teach you if you let me." I said, "Well, if that's what you want, I'll let you. But that means, God, I'm giving up everything for this." He says, "Good. Because that's what I've called you to do. I haven't called you to be a star. I've called you to help churches know how to get into the presence of God." And so, that was 30-some years ago, and since then, we've been a long road, and about colleges, and we came back here because my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and after she passed away, I said, well, what do I do now, Lord? And that's when the Lord gave me the vision to start the worship